Hello, welcome to Lard TV. This time we're taking a break from the War Games table and we're looking at a workshop session where we're going to be covering converting some plastic Japanese figures into figures in foxholes. Now the whole idea of the workshop sessions is that when we're going around the shows, an awful lot of people say, how do you do that? How do you get that effect? How do you make that? And this gives us an opportunity to answer some of those questions directly. Equally, we put a lot of articles on the blog about how things are made, but in some cases we talk about certain techniques, and this on Lard TV now gives us an opportunity to show you exactly how things are done rather than just writing about it. So let's have a look at the ingredients that we need for this project and the tools that we're going to be using. The first thing is a nice big box of plastic Japanese figures. There's a lot of debate in the hobby about plastics against metals. Personally, I prefer metals when I am putting together a standard platoon, but when it comes to adding extra support options which you can't always get in metal, such as Japanese engineers, or in this situation Japanese in foxholes, plastic figures are absolutely perfect for converting because they're easily cut up basically. Okay, now what else have we got? 2-inch 50mm round MDF disc in 3mm from war bases. This is going to be my basic piece of terrain. Doesn't really matter if you use 2 or 3mm, you're not going to get any warping with something this size when you apply any liquids or waters, but I prefer 3mm as it just is a little bit weightier and it helps me to see it on the table. It doesn't blend in quite as much. Now, tools. Again, as with plastic figures and as with metal figures, it's a case of choosing the right tool for the job. So I'm going to be using two sorts of glues. I've got this glue, a Revel glue, which is for plastics on plastics. The way this works is it just melts the plastic. So if you've got two bits of plastic that you're attaching together, in this case we're going to be attaching the arms to the torso, it melts those plastic fibres and fuses them together to give a really, really good solid lock. However, where we're going to be sticking the plastic figure to the base, we're going to be using standard super glue. I tend to buy my super glue online rather than going to local craft or DIY stores where you get tiny bottles at an exorbitant price. Something like this is going to cost very, very similar online, £3, £4, maybe £5, but that's going to last me 6 months, and that's doing a lot of build work. Okay, now in terms of important things, there we go. Rather heavy duty, but it does the job for me. If I'm going to cut figures roughly, that's the piece, followed by some more delicate cutters. These are by Citadel. Again, I got mine on eBay. I think they were about £12 or £15, which is a bit of a luxury, but don't worry, if you don't have them, and I've only just got them, this is your friend. It's just a toenail clipper which you can get for a few pounds from any chemist, and this does almost the same job, apart from the fact that the cut you get is going to be curved rather than flat headed. Sometimes that can be a problem, sometimes it can actually be an advantage. For example, if you're removing heads and you can get that cutter underneath, it often creates a nice rounded cut. Knives. You can either use a craft knife. I use scalpels because I've got a large supply of them, and they pretty much do the same job. I'm going to be using a small file. This is good for, you know, if you've got any flash on the figure or if you are just trying to get a flat surface. This is a three-sided triangular file which comes to a nice small end. And finally, a bit of old sandpaper, nothing clever or flash here, but this is just going to be used to really just flatten things off. So obviously, in this age where things that should be obvious are no longer obvious, it's important to point out that all of these things can do nasty things to them. I don't think the sandpaper could, but I wouldn't advise trying it. Most of these things can do nasty things to you. So if you are using these to undertake modelling jobs, be very, very careful. If you don't feel confident, get somebody who knows what they're doing to assist you. And I would specifically aim that at any youngsters who've probably grown up in a world where knives and things like that are something quite strange to them. Oh, one final thing. Polyfiller, quick dry. It's one of my favourite tools. We'll be using that later in the build. Nearly forgot that, which is difficult as it's the largest thing here. So that's it. Obviously health and safety all covered. Let's go and have a look at the build. I do apologise. Either you're looking at me, which is probably not the best thing, or you're going to be looking down at what I'm doing on the bench. So I'm going to be talking to you without looking at you, so apologies for that. But let's go and have a look at how we get cracked on with this. So the piece that I've actually removed from the sprue looks like this. Hopefully you can see that. I'll do a close-up on that in a moment. And what we're going to do is we're going to use the big cutters to chop his leg off. Now I'm doing that at the level of the frock. What we don't want to do is go to the waist, because there would be too much of the figure in the hole. So we'll cut him off there with my superhuman strength. Now what you can see about this figure is it's quite an odd one, in as much as the leg is up, like he's having a bit of a knees up. So we're going to cut that off and actually cut that off at the front as well. And I chose this figure because it's probably the least appropriate figure. So we'll have a look at that and see where I've made those cuts. You can see there where I've cut off the right hand leg just below the frock. I'm going to tidy that up in a minute using the frock of the coat as a guideline, and the front leg I've just hacked off. At the moment that's a bit untidy. As we can see, that's a bit of a dog's dinner, so I'm just going to use these more detailed clippers to tidy that up. So the important thing is that we're just left with the torso. It's rather small, but hopefully you can see what I've done there. What I'm going to do now is use the file just to tidy that up, followed by the sandpaper. Now the easiest way to sandpaper this is not pick that up and do that. If you want a flat surface on the bottom, just have it there and rub that over it until it's flat. Now, with that done, I'm going to add the arms, which I've already detached from the sprue. And the important thing here, where you're doing a figure who's going to be in a foxhole, is that you can't have one. I'm going to let that melt for a moment and put a little bit on this. So as I was talking about earlier, this is a case of the glue actually melting the plastic. So if you leave it for 30 seconds or so, it's going to have a better thing. You can't have a figure where the rifle butt is down in the ground. He's got to have his arms up as though he's actually firing from the shoulder or in a similar position. Otherwise, it's going to be difficult to build up that terrain around him. Now let's just pop those two figures together. I should leave that a bit longer, but for the sake of this camera, we can see that we've got a little fella who's sat there, and the next thing to do is going to be to stick him onto that disc with super glue. Now what I'm not going to do is actually just do one figure at a time, because I'm not a lunatic. I'm actually going to be doing about a dozen of these, so rather than have you sit there and watch me do them, I'm going to let this chap dry while I then go and cut apart all the other figures. That leads us on to continuity. This is a project that's not all going to be done in one go, so you may see me making more changes of clothes than a Butlins drag queen, in which case don't worry, I'm equally due for a haircut tomorrow, so I don't have any bizarre disease which makes my hair shrink, so don't worry about that. So there is going to be a little bit of changes in continuity, but hopefully, other than that, the rest of the film will make sense. So, I'm going to get on with that. As you can see, we've got these figures all stuck on the base, and then we just add the heads, so they're pretty much finished now. So now we have our Japanese gentleman nicely attached onto our base. The next stage is going to be to build up the ground around him. Now, this is a really simple stage, and normally I would use a butter knife to do this. But as my wife might tune in and watch this video, I think I will use this small piece of wood instead. I bought some of these strips of wood ages ago to make a palisade for a dark age compound, and never got around to using it, so we'll see what use we can put them to. So I've squeezed out some of my quick drying polyfiller. Now, anybody who has read Lard News will know how much I like quick drying polyfiller. You can get this stuff in powdered format. It's a filler that you use for filling in holes in the walls. This stuff is designed for little bumps, and the reason it says quick drying is that if there's a tiny little gash in the wall, you just wipe it over. If it's a millimetre or two deep, then it literally will dry in 5 minutes, but in this case it's not going to do so. Now, what I think we'll do is we're going to zoom in and have a look at me applying this. Okay, so I've got my figure and I've got my butter knife, and I am going to simply apply the earth around this, pushing down at the edges so that I get it to be flushed with the base at the edge, but the overall effect is that it's built up around the point where the man himself is in the hole. Doesn't have to be too deep. It's basically a trick of the eye, to be honest with you. What we're looking to do is make him look like he's dug in. And some of that is going to be used by painting the hole that he's in, in fairly dark colours, so it looks like it's in shadow. And the other bit is going to be achieved just by building that up slightly. Now, there we go. We're not trying to get any earth effects on this. It's just simply a case of getting the chap into the hole, and we'll zoom in on that and have a quick look at that. As you can see, it's a pretty rough and ready job, but that's all we need. It's we're not trying to do anything clever here, we just spread it on around the figure. Now we want to add some of that surface texture that we're talking about. Two things I need for this: PVA, often called school glue or kids glue. Don't buy it through art supplies, buy it through builders merchants or DIY stores. I got this from Wickes. I think it cost me about £9–10, but that was a couple of years ago. Reason for that is that I haven't used it all up yet. It just goes a long way, especially as for a lot of things you add water to it. So get that from building supplies. Next thing is sharp sand. Sharp sand is absolutely brilliant for terrain. The important thing to remember though is it needs to be dried out, so you cannot keep it in the sacks that it comes in. You've got to tip it into a tub or a box and leave that somewhere dry with the lid open so that any water can disappear. Some people do talk about shoving it in the microwave and superheating it. Personally, I don't like doing that, but I just keep 2 tubs of it, one that's live and the other that's drying out. And that seems to work for me. So we're going to apply that to our base just to get a little bit of ground texture. Let's have a look at that. this couldn't be more simple. I'm just painting the PVA on the figure, keeping it away from the figure itself. Just using an old brush for this, you don't have to be precise. I don't want it to go in the hole. I could water this down, but to be honest with you, this type of amount, it's not really worth it. So here we go, get my figure, dip it in the sharp sand. And that will tell us if I've missed out any spots on there, which I have just a couple of places missed out, which I'm gonna and then there we have it. We've got our base textured. What I'm going to do is, once that's dried, I'm going to go over that with a watered down mix of PVA, covering all that, which will seal it into place. But for now, that's a good starting point for our texture. Okay, so here we are back in the workshop. We've allowed our model time to dry. I've basically taken that and the glue's dried, and we've put the as we can see, we put on the sand that we're going to use as ground cover there. So what is the next step? Well, two things. First of all, if you look carefully there, you can see a little damaged area. If I turn it around, you can see that there's a hole being drilled right the way through. Now what I'm going to do at a certain point is use that hole to put in some foliage. I've got some plastic foliage that I'm going to use. So this little guy is going to be there with a big bush behind him, so he's effectively taking cover in the vegetation that's there. But I'm not going to put that in yet, because I want to be able to do all the painting first of all. I want to be able to, the order that I think is going to be best to do this in is to paint the base and then any sculpted terrain that's on there, which is something we're about to look at, and then to paint the figure. And once the figure is painted, we're going to paint the vegetation and add that on. But the next stage is going to be using something I've got in my hand here, which I'm kneading. It's not my old chewing gum. It's a bit of green stuff that I've just been kneading to get nice and warm and pliable, because what we're going to be doing is adding a bit of detail to the base so that we can really have it looking quite interesting. Now, there's only two things that I sculpt when I'm sculpting on these bases. One of them is sandbags, nice and easy, rectangular, with a little bit of lines on it so you can see stitching and some holes, so you can see where they're tied back up with cord to keep the sand in place. And the other thing are just little wooden branches, which are quite easy. You just make a nice little sausage out of this. You pat the ends flat, poke the ends with a little pointed object, and then just score on some lines to reflect the bark. Really very, very simple. Now, often you can use tools, and I do use tools sometimes, which are like metal sculpting tools. However, just to keep things easy, I'm going to use a toothpick and a craft knife, and that is it, because these are things really well, you're going to have the second one at home if you're doing any converting or anything like that at all. And quite frankly, we all need cocktail sticks for one reason or another, but any pointed obstacle can do. So let's have a bit of a zoom in and see what we're going to do to get this guy looking as nice as possible. Well, here we are. There's a limit to how much you're going to be able to see of this, but hopefully I'm going to be able to wave it in the direction of the camera at certain points in order to show you some of the fine detail. First thing I need to do this is a pair of spectacles, otherwise I can't see a damn thing. So I'm going to get my bit of green stuff, and we're going to create just a little log for him to be leaning his rifle on. So I'm going to make a sausage, and I'm just going to push that down there gently, excuse me, so it's in position. So just a bit of a dab there to make sure that's stuck down. Then I'm going to square off the ends just to get them nice and tidy. And then the thing you really want to do with the ends is just gently go round and draw a line around as much of the outside as you can. It's only important really to do the top, because we can assume that the bottom part of the trunk is buried in a bit of sand or earth. Now, I don't know how much of that you can see, but basically what we're doing there is we're showing the difference between the bark and the actual wood. And then the way I represent the wood is just dab my little pointed tool, in this case a toothpick, in there a few times just to get a bit of an uneven texture. I'm doing this away from the camera so I can see it better, because I couldn't really see it when I was waving it in your direction, as they say. Right, so that's one end. We do the same with the other end. This is nice and simple. I would suggest that start off doing this, do a couple of these, and then you can get involved in things like adding in branches where they come off, and that just adds a little bit of variety. Right, so there we are. We'll do the same again there. Just tip tap to get that bit of texture on there. I'm not sure how much of that you're seeing, because obviously the way things are, I can't be adjusting the focus. So here we go now, we just draw lines on it to represent the bark. And as you can see, that's very, very simply done using the craft knife. So just literally draw your lines all the way down the piece of green stuff, which already actually is starting to look like a log rather than a piece of green stuff. And that, of course, is the result that we're looking for. Let's have a go at that, actually. Talking of adding a branch in, let's have a go at that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to poke my cocktail stick in there and just draw that out. And you can see, as I put that back in together, you can see that what we have there, hopefully, is a bit of a juncture where a branch is coming off the main tree, and that just adds a little bit of variety. The thing I like to try and do at each end is to just gently put a cut in the bark where it ends, because if a broken bit of wood is there, the bits where it's going to start breaking up is where it frays at the edges. So just add a little bit of detail in there, and you can make this as rough as you like. So you're not trying to be clever, not trying to make this smooth, because this is going to look like a bit of damaged tree that's come down and our Japanese gentleman is using for cover. So there we have it. You can put him down. Hopefully you'll get a good image there of what he's doing there. Now, another bit of green stuff here, same bit of green stuff, a bit I tore off. And what I'm just going to do there is add a bit of a sandbag on here at the side. So what I try and do with that, I don't know if you can see it, I get it sort of that shape, which is a rubbish description. It's a vaguely rectangular, but it is a cylindrical, and I put it on and I squish it down, and I get my knife and I do what I did with the tree trunk, and I flatten the ends off. Right, so that is basically how it is. Now what I do at each end is I take the knife and I draw a line. I don't know if you can see that, and I'll do the same at the other end, because this is representing the points where the sandbag can be filled up. It's a bit too fat, so I'll squish it down a bit, just using the flat of my blade, and make sure I do that. If I want to make it, if it's going a bit too oval, I can always get my toothpick and just drag the corners out a bit. That will encourage it to look more rectangular. Let's do that. Use the cocktail stick as a bit of a rolling pin. And then at the point here, find the sharpest end of the cocktail stick and just put a little line of dots. Now, I don't know if you can see that, hopefully you can. That little line of dots is where the thread would be run through the sandbag to ensure it was sealed up once the sand was put in. And I'm going to do exactly the same at the other end. And then down the side, I'm just gently going to put a little line of sort of dashes, effectively. So we've got Morse code almost, dashes and dots. That effectively is the seam. And then I'm going to use the flat side of the cocktail stick to push down and create some creases. So we can see there that our Japanese gentleman is sheltering behind a blown up bit of tree and a sandbag. Now you can extend that as much as you like, but we are going to be using plenty of clump foliage, cut very small, in order to get this chap looking as at home in the jungle as possible. But it just means that he looks a little bit more as though this is a prepared position rather than a hole in the ground he's dug with a teaspoon. So there we go, that's where we are there. The next stage is going to be going on to putting the base coat on that, the undercoat and the base coat. But before we do this, I thought I would just bring out these guys here, because I haven't just been working on one at a time, that would be crazy. So a little bit as they do on the television. Here's some more that I have prepared beforehand, and you can see there's quite a lot of variety in these, which I think adds to it. Some guys have got sandbags, some guys have got a couple of logs, some guys have got no logs and just sandbags. But it does mean you can get a real nice variety, and those guys are going to look good on the tabletop. And quite unique and different. The great thing about the plastic figures is that they're ideal for this, because all the rubbish that comes with it, the thing that puts me off plastic figures in many cases is that it is a bit like making a Tamiya kit if you're a military modeller. So all the bits and pieces that you normally have to stick on here, water bottles, so on and so forth, we're really not going to see, because these holes that we create, and here we've got two of them, are going to be behind our model. So these guys have got foliage at their back, and that is going to be masking anything there. So it's going to be a really quick and easy paint job on those figures in order to get them looking good. So that's what we've got, and we're going to be going forward with these. So the next phase is going to be to spray them black, after which I'm going to put an undercoat on, a base coat of brown, which is just my standard terrain coat. I'm not bothered if that goes on the figures. In fact, with the uniform colours that I'm going to be using here, predominantly sort of yellow Middlestone colour, I'm quite happy for that to happen. But that's what we've got, and we'll see you shortly. Okay, so here we are back again, and what have I been doing since you last saw me? Well, I've been painting the town brown. This basically is an exterior paint, the type of paint that you'd use if you were painting rendering on the outside of a property. I use it because it's tough, it's resilient, and it serves as a good sort of dark brown base for earth. But also in this case, I've slapped it on the figure, which we'll see in a minute when we go into some close-ups. Now let's talk briefly about painting terrain. One of the things I don't do with terrain, or try not to do, is use decent colour paints. The type of thing that I'm using are things like this, which is acrylic, which I get from an art shop. Similar thing here. This is the green that I've been using throughout. It's a Winsor & Newton Galleria. It's what they call sap green. Funny old name, but there we go. The other things I use, a lot of things like little match pots. Match pots come in different shapes and sizes. You can get ones like this, which is a nice one for adding to greens to get a sort of creamy yellowy colour. You can use this type of size, but you also get little pots like little tubes like this, which are just as good. And I would tend to use these when I'm doing dry brushing on the ground. In fact, I use two here when I'm going to do it, and one is called Chop Chip, and it's a crown match pot, and the other is called something I've got no idea until I put my glasses on, which is called Picnic Basket, which is a totally stupid name for a paint, but it's quite a nice colour. So we'll have a look at how I'm doing that in a minute. One of the other things I've done on some of these bases have got a couple of holes drilled in them. So what I've done is I put a toothpick in, because I'm going to have a couple of different types of vegetation on this. So here we're going to have the vegetation. If anybody out there has been looking at Lard Island News and seeing what I'm doing with the jungle build, they'll see that I put these cocktail sticks in, tap them in from the bottom, poke them through there, and use a small hammer, an upholsterer's hammer, to push them through there. What I'll do eventually is paint that green, and we'll have a spiky type of plant on there. So that spike will either will serve as an anchor point, but will also look like a spiky bit of frond, so it fits in nicely. Haven't done that on all of them, but the other thing I've done is this, which looks slightly odd. A random piece of MDF. Some of the standing foliage that we're going to be using on those I like to paint. It paints best when it is in an upright position, so you can get the brush in all around it, dry brush it, whatever. So I pop them in there, paint them in there. All I do is pull it out, and when I'm ready to put that on that base, what I'll be able to do, hopefully, is just take that and push it through there. So this is kind of going to be part of the effect we're getting. Obviously we're going to be putting some other foliage on there as well, but you can see there how that is going to fit. So enough on that. It's not really that interesting to watch me paint things, but what I'm going to try and show here is the order that I do things. Had I stuck these bits on these bases, this would have been really quite difficult to paint. Had I painted the little man first of all, then that would have meant that when I dry brushed it up and painted the other bits of detail on the ground, the chances are I'd have got it slapped all over him as well. So I'm trying to get this done in the right order to get the right effect. So what we're going to do now is we're going to zoom in and we're going to have a look just basically how I dry brush that up, and how we're going to get some detail on that. It's not very interesting, but you know, you might as well have a look and see what order it's done in, because that's the most important thing. So let's get up close and personal and see what we're doing there. Okay, well, we're not going to mess about here. As you can see, dry brushing. I've got a decent sized flat head brush. You want to try and get as much coverage as possible. I've mixed my paint up on a little palette. I use an old tea plate that I picked up from a car boot sale, or some elderly relative's cupboard. And I give that a relatively heavy dry brush over that ground. And you can see that, this is the chocolate chip colour. You can see that picking out the detail on that base. Okay, and I'm going to do a couple more just to give that a moment to dry. It's not very exciting, but you can see that I'm moving around the outside. I'm trying not to get this on the figure. Doesn't really matter if I did, but you know, easier to keep it clean. I'm not worried about getting it on the sandbags. We're going to have a look at them in a minute. Do them slightly differently. I'm not bothered about the logs, because to be honest with you, I haven't even decided what colour I'm going to be painting the logs, and this may not be a bad base colour. Right, okay, so easy thing to do, just clean that brush up just by, you don't want water when you're dry brushing, just clean that up by rubbing it on there. Right, the next phase is going to be to get a little bit of the next colour, which, as you can see, when we put it there in contrast, is lighter than obviously than the colour I've used. And again, I'm going to take that out of there. I got a bit too much out there, so I'm actually just going to rub it on that piece of paper, because I don't want this to be as wet as the first coat, and I just go over that. once again picking up those highlights. So, as you can see, this is a process that takes seconds and really not an awful lot of care, which suits me down to the ground because that just about sums up most of my modelling and painting skills. So there we are, as I said, not very exciting, but let's have a look down there again, because what I'm going to do now is add a little bit of detail onto the sandbags, try and pick them out, have a bit of an experiment with the logs, see what colour we like, and we'll see what we get there. The kind of thing, the theme that I'm looking at there is this Vallejo khaki. I am going to use Vallejo on this because when you're painting those sandbags, it's basically the same as painting a figure. You want to be able to build up the colour, get some shading, probably put a wash on that. So we're going to go with a decent paint for that. So let's zoom in again and see where we go with that. Okay, what I'm doing here is I'm just applying the Vallejo to the sandbags. This is the Vallejo khaki colour. Nothing very interesting to see, apart from the fact you can just see I'm taking a bit of care. This is not a case of slapping it on as it was with the base colours. And I'm just going to work through these until I've got all the sandbags done. I've changed brush here. I've moved to the flat-headed brush, and what I'm doing is I'm just using the same colour and quickly dry brushing over the log. So we're still seeing that dark, rich brown of the basing colour, but we're highlighting that up with a fairly hefty dry brush there. And 24 hours later, everything's painted, everything's dried, everything's varnished, and here's the little guy we initially started with. You can see his log, you can see the sandbag, and you know, as we've seen with these guys, things that need to be green are green. Now, what do we do next? Well, of course, we've got these, which we, if you remember, we had being prepared over here. And I've done a few other bits of greenery, like this, and like these. And so we can have quite a bit of variety, at least on the spiky ones. Just really, I went through my green bits spares box and dug them out. So the first thing I'm going to do is get myself a nice little spiky file. So if I need to make the holes any bigger I can, but I'm going to start off putting in some of these green bits. Now I haven't actually, I've decided to do it this way around. I was going to put the clump foliage on the base, and then I thought, no, actually, I'm going to put these on, and then I can try and clump the clump foliage up around the base of the plants so you don't see the sticky through bit there. So this really is very, very simple. I'll just do a couple of these here for you. Super glue, pop a dab on there, literally a tiny dot, shove that through with my thumb, and we've got one ready done. Now let's go on to this one here. This one, as we can see underneath, has got two holes. One's got a bit of wood and one's not, so we'll just make that one that doesn't a bit bigger. We'll try it for size with one of these green ones. Yeah, lovely fit there. In fact, we're going to have to wiggle that about to allow this guy to see out from underneath it. But the effect here, so we just put our glue on the green spike. When we pop that plant over the top, wiggle it, and then we'll wiggle it about to make sure the foliage allows us to see him. So he's in there. And then you can see actually the spike, well, hopefully you can see, the spike doesn't even come out the top on this particular plant. While I'm holding that one in place, I will put another little dot of super glue on there, pop another one of these out and then shove that through. So this guy is really got himself hidden away nicely. What have we got here? Sometimes the best way to see how many holes there are is to look underneath, because once you get them painted up, you can sometimes get a bit of filler in those holes, a bit of sand in those holes, but if you look underneath, that will tell you. No. And we'll do another one here. This is a nice spike one. Again, we've got two. Funnily enough, there's me saying that, and that hole definitely needs a bit of a rummage around in there. I'll do it from both sides just to make sure. And we will put the super glue on the green bit, put a dab of super glue there. I think I'm going to put this one in first because the other one, as you'll see in a minute, is quite an impressive piece. So again, we've got our man really taking cover among the foliage. Try another one. Again, enlarge the hole. I mean, there's no rhyme or reason for which order these should go in, but I'm actually putting the more controllable ones in first, the smaller ones basically in first, and then anything that, this is an unusual one, it's got quite a lot of base on the ground, so I'm going to put that there, and we'll see if this even fits actually. I'm not sure that's going to fit, so what I'm going to do is go off shot. Get a pair of scissors. And just cut some of it away. By the time we put the base on, we'll see if that's going to fit any better now. Yeah. There we go, you can see that is nicely tucked in, hopefully. See, that's nicely tucked in behind that sandbag. I'm going to push that one down for a moment, just to get that glue, that super glue connecting. And this spare bit I can always just tuck in somewhere else. But you get the idea. So we'll stick these down and then we'll spin straight back in a minute to see what they all look like when they're done. And there we have it. That's all of them done. Some of them are sitting a bit wonky because I still have got to deal with issues like that where you can see the bit of plant is coming through the base. But that actually is a good thing because once the glue is dried, we'll just cut that off, rub a bit of sandpaper down, and the thing isn't just making contact with the surface of the base, it's actually going right the way through, which means it's the strength of the bond is multiplied many times. But you can also see that I've got some touching up the plants to do, a bit of highlighting to do. But generally, these guys are coming out with the effect that I want so far. Now we just need to make that ground look a little bit more jungle-ified, if that is a word. So let's have a look at how we're going to do that. Okay, so here we go. On to the next phase. I've actually let these dry for about 10-15 minutes to give us a chance to get everything ready. And what I've got now, very simply, is a little pot of PVA. I've got a fairly detailed brush, obviously not one with a decent point, but the type of thing that you might use for putting on a base colour. Little pot of water, because I don't really like, well, I don't want to use neat PVA for this. And the main thing that I've got here now is my ground cover mixture. And let's have a look there. Now, what's that about? Ground cover mixture. Well, it's a mixture of clump foliage, which I put through the food processor when the wife wasn't looking. It actually works really well. It chops it up into tiny little bits. The problem is that the big glass thing that you put it in is covered in a horrible colour of green, so you need to scrub it out. So if you're doing it, allow yourself plenty of time and plenty of hot water to do that. But I have mixed that in with some herb de Provence. I bought a huge sack of that online for £8, literally about the size of a bed pillow, and just mix those all in together. Now, what I'm going to do now is start applying that to my bases. Okay, I could mix up my PVA with some water, but I actually like to keep the two separate so I can just get a fine tune on what I'm doing. What I'm going to be doing now is going around and especially paying attention around the base of the plant, because this ground cover stuff is not so much grass but dead plant matter which has fallen off existing plants. So the idea is to put that as close in around the jungle plants that we've used. So you can see there, I haven't put it everywhere on the base, but literally around those plants. And the next step is literally going to be just to dunk that in there and give it a mix around. And what I do is I leave that one in there while I'm getting the next one ready. So here we go, here's another one. Oh, blimey, there's a lot of coverage here. So we'll do exactly the same thing again, all around underneath that plant, maybe a little bit out the front, I think, actually. Right, so put that there. Knock that one off. And you can hopefully see that we've got quite a bit of base covered there in and around those plants. Now remember, this isn't going to be the final thing we're putting on. We're still going to put on our static grass. So this is just, the nice thing about this is it gives us some texture on our base rather than just green static grass. Again, leave that one in the pot, then on to the next one. Try and avoid getting this over anything like the logs we've carved or the sandbags, but have it running up to it, that's fine. So this is a bit of an open base, so I'm actually going a bit wider out just to add a bit of interest on the base, really. I am going to be coming back. You may look at some of these plants and think, oh, they're a bit blotchy. You're right. I'm going to be coming back and adding some highlights onto those, so they're going to become a lot prettier, but I don't see any point in doing that till last, so that's why I'm leaving it. So we'll keep going on this, and in a moment you're going to get bored to tears, and I'm going to switch the camera off and we'll come back and show you everything in its completed state. Here we are. This is the finished result. We can see where I've the flock's still wet on these, so the colour is going to tone down, but you can see, sorry, I keep calling it flock, static grass flock mix. You can see basically what we've done here and what we've got with our guys very much there in their prepared positions in the jungle. This was the original one that I did, sculpted that up with the log and the sandbag, and the great thing is you can get a lot of variety. So some of these guys are really hidden away in there, which I think presents a great effect. I've still got to touch up some of the foliage, but I think it presents a great effect. And these would make fantastic jump-off points for chain of command as well. That's the end of our first workshop project on Lard TV. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope it's been helpful. It's certainly been an interesting process for us in which we've learnt a few things. I have to say, next time we do it, we should be able to get some of the video quality better, but rather than throw all that away, because I felt some of the information in there was useful, we decided to run with some of the poorer shots that we had there. So apologies for that, but I think the main emphasis is very much on hoping that it was informative, and we will look forward to doing more of similar stuff in the future. If there's anything you'd like to see covered, please let us know. Anything you see in any of our games that you're interested in, to know how we built something or how we made something, then just let us know in the comments below. So that's all for now. Thank you for watching.